In this section, I'd like to explore the history of John Swire and Sons after 1945. And I'd like to explore why they stayed in Hong Kong. By 1941, Swire was extremely well established across China and in Hong Kong. But by September 1945, it had lost almost everything in China except land. The Japanese, having taken Hong Kong and having captured the treaty ports in China where Swire had its businesses, had destroyed its infrastructure except its land. During the war, with most of its staff either captured by the Japanese or working in the British Armed Forces or the Merchant Navy, had very little to do. In wartime, the company in London bought farmland across England. It explored investing in former Italian colonies in East Africa. It looked at ways to move beyond China and Hong Kong. But Swire had a name. It had a great reputation. It was one of the big British Hongs, one of the most powerful and influential British companies. It had people. It had staff who would need employment at the end of the war. It had a great deal of knowledge about markets in China. It had an immense, dense network of connections with Chinese traders and with officials in China. And in Hong Kong, they had properties. They had the dockyard, they had the sugar refinery. But peace brought continued pressure and instability in China, a civil war. And it brought the end of special British privileges when it came to trading in China as well, the end of extraterritoriality. So Swire, like other British companies, had to change the way that they operated. Their former freedoms to operate were restricted. In China, they were restricted, but not in Hong Kong, which remained a British colony. The triumph of the Chinese Communist Party in 1949 and the establishment of the People's Republic changed things quite dramatically. And by 1954, Swire had left China, having surrendered all of its assets there. It was reduced to Hong Kong and its network, which still existed in Japan, and its network of connections with its collaborators in Southeast Asia, Australia, and London. Hong Kong remained a precarious place. The Korean War, the Taiwan Straits crises in 1954 to 55 and 1958, all meant that the company continued to explore ways in which it could diversify its risk, in which it could perhaps move significant operations overseas. It explored Australia and it explored Japan, and whilst it continued to have business in both countries, it kept coming back to Hong Kong. Why did the company stay in Hong Kong? For a start, it stayed in Hong Kong because after the war, it bought a significant share of a start-up company, a new airline called Cathay Pacific. Cathay Pacific is today one of the world's most prominent and successful airlines. It began with 2 men on 1 plane in Hong Kong and was nurtured by Swire when they took it over. Cathay Pacific had all the advantages of Hong Kong's role as a hub between China and Southeast Asia and Japan and Australia and elsewhere. It was the officially recognized and supported airline in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's place changed. I mean, I don't mean that Hong Kong moved. Of course it didn't move. Hong Kong stayed in the same place. But new borders and barriers meant the evolution in the way that Hong Kong was connected to the world and new opportunities for companies like Swire's. Swire could no longer look north to China. It had to look elsewhere. And Cathay Pacific became the vehicle by which Swire created new business across what we now call Southeast Asia and Australia. And Cathay Pacific would eventually come to be able to fly routes to England, as well as across the Pacific. Hong Kong's position as a gateway to a newly closed China was very important, especially with the container revolution in the 1970s. And Hong Kong became a new container hub for shipping. Across the post-war period, some of Swire's successful industries in Hong Kong went into decline. The dockyard and the sugar refinery in particular, with the growth of new industries, especially in Japan and Southeast Asia. But Swire still had land and was able to turn its former dockyard and refinery properties into housing and property development, initially with a big housing development at Taikoo Shing. So Swire had many reasons to leave East Asia altogether by 1945. But in fact it stayed and recommitted itself to East Asia and to Hong Kong, and for very good practical reasons, because of the changing role of Hong Kong during the Cold War and during the 1970s and 1980s. And of course, by the end of the 1970s and into the 1980s, Swire was ideally placed, as Hong Kong was ideally placed, to engage with China as it reopened its economy in the period of reform. So Swire's story is but one story of a British firm operating in Hong Kong across the 19th and 20th century. It's a story which teaches us a lot about Hong Kong's role within the British world of trade with China, and within the history of what we now call globalization. Swire's story is the story of how a small Liverpool trading firm came to be a very powerful and influential and prominent feature of Hong Kong as it is today.